Joining us now, top Trump ally, Republican Senator Tom Cotton, a member of the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, who also served in the military himself. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. So for almost a year now, Israel has been fighting on 5 different fronts. Hamas to its west, Hezbollah to the north, the Houthis to the south, Iran and its proxies in Iraq and Syria in the east and northeast. And just this morning, there was a new round of rocket fire and airstrikes between Israel and Hezbollah. How concerned are you about a bigger, larger regional war and the United States being pulled in or voluntarily going into the war?
Well, if there is a larger war, it's not going to be by accident. Wars don't happen by accident. They happen, because, in this case, because Iran and its terrorist network all around Israel, as you just laid out, Jake, are intent on destroying Israel. A lot of attention has been focused over the last 11 months, rightly so, on Hamas to the south. But I think many Americans probably don't appreciate just how much Hezbollah from Lebanon has been striking into Israel. You still have 80,000 Israelis who have had to flee their homes in the north and be evacuated into friends' or families' homes or hotels. Just to put that in perspective, it would be as if the entire populations of Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont had to flee to Boston or New York or Philadelphia because we're having cross-border strikes from Canada. No civilized nation can tolerate that, can allow their people to live under those conditions. Israel has every right to defend itself and to go on offense against a terrorist organization in Lebanon, and we need to give them the tools to defeat both Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north and defend their own people.
Is the United States not giving tools that Israel needs?
No. First off, they're not giving them the political and diplomatic support that they needed from the very beginning. If rather than trying to put constant pressure on Israel, more pressure than we put on Iran and its terrorist networks, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had simply adopted a policy to let Israel win and back them to the hilt, the war in Hamas probably would have ended a long time ago. Earlier this year, there was a de facto partial arms embargo on Israel, not just the 2,000-pound bombs, which they do need to hit Hamas in its deep and buried tunnels, but mortar rounds and artillery shells and small arms ammunition. Now they even have a tractor embargo in Israel. So Israeli soldiers are going to be exposed to minefields that can't be cleared because the Biden-Harris administration won't allow them to get access to the tractors and the bulldozers they need to clear those minefields. So consistently, the Biden-Harris administration has put more pressure on Israel than it has put on Israel's enemies. That's probably had the effect of prolonging the fighting.
A lot of the protests against Netanyahu are coming from within Israel itself. You've seen hundreds of thousands of Israelis critical of how Netanyahu is waging this war, whether or not he's emphasizing too much going against Hamas as opposed to rescuing the hostages. I spoke, as I often do, with families of these hostages, and they said point blank that Netanyahu is not doing enough to bring their loved ones home safely. Here's just a sample of that.
I think all Israelis are done listening to Prime Minister Netanyahu, because clearly there's a gap between what he says in terms of his commitment to getting the hostages home and his actions.
This pager, Mission Impossible action, it's like tweeting agony with more agony. This vicious cycle of violence needs to stop.
So those were American hostages, 4 of them still alive, and 3 of them represented in this group dead, but wanting these 2 individuals, wanting their parents and their sons' bodies to come home. But this is a legitimate criticism from Israeli Americans and Israelis. What do you say to them when they say this escalation hurts?
Well, first off, I express the deepest heartfelt sympathy for them and the agony they can go through. One can only imagine that. But if you look at what's happened over the last 11 months, the only time Hamas has released hostages or hostages have been rescued is when Israel's putting maximum military pressure on Hamas. If the Biden-Harris administration had backed Israel from the beginning, not only would this war likely have already ended with fewer civilian casualties, but we would have gotten more hostages out earlier and alive. What Hamas is doing, though, is continually moving the goalpost on any kind of hostage exchange for duly convicted terrorists that Hamas wants back. And the Biden-Harris administration keeps allowing them to move the goalposts. I mean, remember, the current leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, a bloodthirsty genocidal maniac, used to be in an Israeli prison. He was released in a previous swap. So while my heart breaks for any parent who has to live through this, I think the Israeli government understands that the only way these hostages might come back alive is to put maximum military pressure on Hamas, not to try to trust a terrorist organization to honor their word or to make any kind of deal.
Let's turn to the 2024 election, because at an event earlier this week, ostensibly about combating anti-Semitism, former President Trump suggested that if he loses, it will be the fault of Jewish voters. Take a listen.
Any Jewish person that votes for her, especially now, her or the Democrat Party, should have their head examined. If I don't win this election, and I've been very good, they say Trump's been right about everything. In my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with the loss.
Are you comfortable with that? With Donald Trump saying if he loses preemptively, it's the fault of the Jews, a group already experiencing a rise of anti-Semitism in this country from the left and the right, but still preemptively it's the fault of the Jews?
Well, Jake, Donald Trump has been saying things like this for at least 11 months since the October 7th attacks. I think the only reason the Democrats latched onto it this week is they see the polling that reflects Donald Trump winning record high amounts of Jewish voters for Republicans. The point he's been making all along is that any Jewish voter, Christian voter, or any other kind of voter who cares about Israel, who cares about a relationship with Israel, should not vote for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Joe Biden has not backed Israel very much over the last 11 months. Kamala Harris has been much worse. She treats him she treats Benjamin Netanyahu like a school child. She's an assistant principal who's constantly scolding him. She didn't even perform her constitutional duty to preside over the joint session of Congress when he spoke to Congress.
But I'm not talking about Israel. I'm talking about American Jewish voters. The American Jewish Committee said, quote, whoever a majority of the Jewish community votes for, Jews, roughly 2% of the U.S. population, cannot and should not be blamed for the outcome of the election. Setting up anyone to say we lost because of the Jews is outrageous and dangerous. Thousands of years of history have shown that scapegoating Jews can lead to anti-Semitic hate and violence. That's the nonpartisan American Jewish Committee. I've never heard you say anything like that. If we lose, it will be the fault of the Jews.
But Jake, Donald Trump, again, has been saying for months that anyone who cares about Israel, anyone who cares about the fate of the U.S.-Israel alliance should vote for him. They shouldn't vote for Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris has consistently been the most anti-Israel voice in this administration.
You keep talking about Israel. I'm talking about Jewish voters who vote for any number of reasons on any number of issues.
And he was at an event talking about combating anti-Semitism here and around the world. When was the last time Kamala Harris spoke at an event about combating anti-Semitism?
Her husband is Jewish and is in charge of a group about combating anti-Semitism in the United States.
But she's consistently been opposed to what Israel needs to win.
Again,
not just
I keep talking about Jewish voters in the United States, and you keep talking about another country.
A lot of Jewish voters, just like a lot of Christian voters, care deeply about the fate of the Jewish nation and the status of our relationship with Israel.
Are you comfortable with him blaming it on the Jews preemptively?
The point he is making is that anyone that cares about that relationship shouldn't vote for Kamala Harris. They should vote for him. And again, he's been saying things like this, not just at anti-Semitism events, but speaking to Christians who care about Israel as well for months. The only reason the Democrats have latched onto it now is that polls show he's winning a record number of Jewish voters.
This is the first time he has ever said, if I lose, it will be the fault of Jews. This is, believe me, I happen to have a pretty good ear for when people say things like this, and that's the first time he's ever said that. Just yes or no, are you comfortable with him using that language?
Jake, it's the same kind of language he's been using for months.
That doesn't mean it's okay.
Yes, but it's his point. Jake, he's the most pro-Israel president we've ever had. He has Jewish grandchildren. Of course.
Kamala Harris has a Jewish husband. That doesn't mean anything to you.
Of course. Well, it means something to you because you brought it up. But of course,
you were talking about anti-Semitism, and he's in charge of the group combating anti-Semitism.
Jake, it's the Democratic Party that has a large and growing anti-Semitic wing. That's the party where anti-Semitism has festered now for years.
Let me just say, as somebody who has been at the receiving end of anti-Semitism from the left and the right, there's a lot of it out there. It's from the left and the right.
All those college encampments at Columbia and elsewhere, do you think those are conservative students? Of course not. They're radical left-wing students.
But you know what? When I was watching the Republican National Convention, I heard Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson speak. And Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who's your party's nominee for governor in North Carolina, he has been saying anti-Semitic things for years. For years, he said that the movie Black Panther, this is on his own Facebook under his own name, the movie Black Panther, character created by two Jewish comic book writers, was, quote, created to pull the shekels out of your Schwarze pockets by Jews. And then in the last week, we've heard that he actually was, in the past, posting on a porn site, calling himself a black Nazi, praising Mein Kampf, saying that Adolf Hitler would have been better than Barack Obama. That is your party's nominee for governor in North Carolina, who has been anti-Semitic for years. Do you like him? You think he should be the next governor of North Carolina?
Look, I've seen these allegations, Jake, and they're concerning allegations. He owes the people of North
the
Carolina.
Shekels thing was under his name on his Facebook page.
He owes the people of North Carolina more answers about it. But we're talking about the presidential race here that matters to everyone, not just the people in one state. Kamala Harris owes the American people a lot more answers. Like, for instance, what she would do about the wars in the Middle East. Not just in Gaza, but Hezbollah versus Israel, for that matter, the Iranian-backed terrorists in Yemen that continually target American sailors. Kamala Harris owes a lot of answers to the American people.
Do you think that Trump should still support Mark Robinson in North Carolina?
I'll leave that to President Trump, and most importantly, I'll leave it to the people of North Carolina. That is one state. We're talking about a presidential race that is going to affect every American at a time when a third of Americans can't even afford their groceries.
All right, I just want to thank you for coming on right now, and good to see you, Senator Tom Cotton. I don't disagree that Kamala Harris should answer some more questions and do some more interviews. I'll just for the record. Coming up next, his opponent called himself a black Nazi online. The man running